but I'll also talk about general astrological indicators for the next few months. I really wanted to start off today talking about the Chinese New Year, but unfortunately some other topics have taken my attention before then. So that'll be in a subsequent broadcast. But again, for those of you who don't know, it's now January 29th. We're in the year of the rat. Two sources I've seen actually give the year of the rat as beginning. One gives it as beginning January 25th. Another school, which sets the year at the end of the holiday, sets it closer to February 6th. The more traditional approach is that it's already started. It started January 25th. So, but I will have something for you: rats, dogs, dragons, tigers, monkeys, and roosters, and other assorted animals at the next broadcast, but not this one. So please understand, I'm trying to do a really good job on this for you, as opposed to just throwing something together. So if you can be patient, and also it's fairly common knowledge, like everybody knows their sun sign in Western astrology, and in India everybody pretty much knows their nakshatra, but in Chinese astrology there are also lunar mansions like there are in Indian astrology, and there are also planetary months, for lack of a better term, and sequences, and it also ties in with the ancient discipline of feng shui, which is essentially the art of placement, so you can place good and bad objects in your home, or objects which will enhance luck and will fight bad luck in your home. So I'd like to talk about that when I do the next broadcast, so that will give you some more tools to work with. The main thing I'd like to talk to you about today, though, is we have some major activity coming up in February, and I think one of my main missions in life is to essentially try to calm people down when they see significant astrological combinations coming, because I have noticed a tendency to get really worried when certain astrological combinations occur, and people panic without really analyzing the effects of these planetary combinations. So I'm going to talk about significant planetary combinations, especially that will be occurring between February 16th and March 4th. And the first of these, February 16th, is actually, this starts earlier in February, like around February 5th, but Mars enters Sagittarius around February 5th, and it'll stay in that particular, this is Vedic Sagittarius, not Western Sagittarius. And essentially what it'll do, it essentially energizes Sagittarius, so people will seem a little bit more hostile, a little bit more invasive, a little bit more action-oriented. Projects that have been people have been sitting out for a long time will all of a sudden become very energized, and so that's a good thing. The bad thing about this particular transit is it's entering a very destructive point in space called Mula, M-U-L-A, and Mula is a nakshatra, it's a lunar mansion in Vedic astrological terms, and it's connected with wealth. It's actually a positive lunar mansion from that aspect, but it's also connected with destruction and release and renewal. So essentially, Mula will add to the energy that I spoke about in the broadcast on Saturn, which essentially says you have to tear down in order to build up. So Mula is going to enhance that. So you'll see people going through major life changes when Mars or taking action steps to make major life changes when Mars enters Mula Nakshatra. And a lot of that will have people very scared, but they'll also feel more confident that they can actually progress and do well in this particular transition. The other thing is, Mars will be in the same sign, so it'll actually go through Mula fairly quickly. Nakshatras are around 13 degrees of a sign, and basically Mula is considered what's called is considered a difficult point. It's considered one of the more destructive nakshatras, but it allows for regrowth, rebirth, and rejuvenation. So Mars will give energy back if you wanted to do anything physically, like get into an exercise program or anything like that. Mula Nakshatra is a great nakshatra to do that in. On the other hand, Mula can also make us, or Mars and Mula can also make us a little bit reckless, a little bit difficult to control. It enters the Navamsha of Aries. When it enters that particular sign, Navamshas are 1/9 divisions of the sign, and so essentially there's a rule to this. Essentially, for the first few 3 degrees, 20 minutes of a sign, the element of the sign, Sagittarius, is a fire element. The Navamsha position of the planet will be the cardinal sign of the fire element. So the cardinal sign for fire is Aries. So again, like I said, a lot of action, a lot of aggression. If you've been thinking about doing something for a long time, whether it be occupation, marriage, getting out of marriage, making any kind of a change in your life, Mula Nakshatra will energize that. But it is very destructive. It is very energetic. Now, there's also on February 16th a Mercury retrograde, which I'm going to go back to Mula and Sagittarius in a second. But Mercury retrogrades happen about 3 times a year. The effects are set to last for 3 weeks before the retrogression and 3 weeks after the retrogression. So essentially for about 1/3 of the year, we're in a Mercury retrograde cycle. Now, the reason I'm underscoring this so much is that it's really difficult. So for about 4 months out of the year, we're in this Mercury retrograde period. And a lot of astrologists say, don't sign contracts, don't enter into agreements, don't start anything during Mercury retrograde. And that's just, I'll be honest with you, it's not silly talk, but it's unnecessarily alarmist. A lot of times what happens when you start activities during a Mercury retrograde is things will get delayed. They'll be more difficult to do. You may have to revise your plans when after the Mercury retrograde is over, all those kinds of things. But they're not necessarily going to be disastrous. Most contracts or agreements can be modified. Okay, so, and oftentimes there's a Western astrologer who said this. I can't remember what her name was, but basically Mercury retrograde gives you great bargains. So as a general course of study, if Mercury is retrograde alone, and it'll be retrograde in the same time as Sun and Saturn at that time, actually it was just Saturn, excuse me, it really won't be that catastrophic an event. So communications will be garbled. You'll have some problems understanding other people. You'll have some problems with communication. That's perfectly normal. It's nothing to get all that word out about. Mercury retrogrades, probably not a good time to sign contracts, but again, contracts can be amended. You know, it's not really like you're stuck with a contract for the rest of your life. I probably wouldn't recommend getting married during a Mercury retrograde because that contract is difficult to change. But I would, but again, it kind of depends on the chart. People with Mercury retrogrades in their birth chart, and again, since it happens so frequently, they're fairly common. aren't going to be affected by this all that much. Plus, Mercury gets stronger, so writing ability increases, broadcasting ability increases. You may have some technical problems with broadcasting, but overall, communications actually gets deeper and more thoughtful during a Mercury retrograde. So, I wouldn't get all that panicked about that. The other thing, though, let's get back to Mars and Sagittarius, because Mars is going to be entering a sign that's, again, kind of hot-headed, to be truthfully. Sagittarius, although it's connected with higher knowledge, it can be a dogmatic and a war-starting sign. And Mars is going to be in conjunction with Ketu exactly on March 4th. So a lot of people have looked at this, on February 23rd, it'll be exactly conjunct. And on March 4th, there's a planetary combination which some astrologers have said looks very much like the 9/11, the September 11th attacks combination. Now, I'm not criticizing my fellow astrologers, so that has ominous overtones for everybody, of course, because 9/11 we had the largest terrorist attack occur in the United States, so we certainly don't want to repeat that. But Jupiter's an entirely different sign. The Moon and Ketu are the planets that are involved, and Mars. And essentially what you're looking at is, in the last 9/11, in the 9/11 chart, there wasn't, Jupiter was in Gemini, so it wasn't an unfriendly sign. Jupiter's in its own sign right now. And there are superficial similarities, but Saturn, Venus, Mercury are all in different signs. And also there's one important thing that happened during the 9/11 attacks that some astrologers would not pay attention to. I do, and that is occasionally the nodes Rahu and Ketu go stationary direct. That is, they appear to be moving forwards in the sky. And this was a mathematical adjustment done by a 20th century astrologer. So in traditional Indian astrology, they only use what's called the mean node, and the mean node is always moving backwards. So that particular event doesn't happen during this particular opposition. It did happen during September 11th. When it did happen last was when the Notre Dame fire occurred. Okay, so we had the nodes were stationary direct. The stationary direct node makes a node much more powerful. It makes Rahu and Ketu much more powerful. So Mars, it is said, is like Ketu. So you'll have Mars and Ketu on top of each other on February 23rd. That looks like kind of a difficult period, like between February 18th and February 23rd. And you'll also have that quote-unquote 9/11 combination happening on March 4th. Now, I'm not saying that individual charts aren't going to get affected by that opposition. I think they are, especially people who are Gemini or Sagittarius suns or rising signs in the Vedic astrological system, or they have moons in that sign. But it isn't necessarily going to be life-threatening, or it could actually represent a significant breakthrough for them. And I'm going to pull up a chart right now. So the major recommendation around February 23rd is to be careful traveling. Okay? It is affecting the United States first house, so you should see a lot of dismay or unhappiness around that time. And I have a funny feeling either the Trump trial, the impeachment trial, will go. They'll start calling witnesses, or else it'll be dismissed. It'll be, and by dismissed I mean it'll be voted on by that time, and that'll cause some demonstrations. But this is not really going to cause the level of demonstration that we saw in the 60s or even later on, because the 60s were a particularly difficult time for most people. And there was a major war going on, and there was a civil rights movement, and a lot of those things, even though there are some problems, definitely some problems right now, the nature of those problems doesn't seem to me to really engage as many people as those problems did back in the 1960s. So it's really, yeah, an astrologer has to be cautious not to panic people, and I don't like panicking people. The one thing I would be careful for, though, is in certain countries. So I have the chart set up for February 23rd. Yep, and K2 is at 12 degrees 36 minutes. Mars is at 10 degrees 50 minutes. And if we advance, so about a week from that will be kind of a sensitive period for people. About a week from that point in time, because Mars and K2 are both potentially destructive planets. But I don't see a war breaking out. I don't see anything like that happening. The other thing, and they're both in Mula Nakshatra, which is again kind of a wiping out, but it can wipe out judicial matters. It can wipe out. I think you will see an increase in gun violence around that time between February 20th and February 28th. That much I do fear. And if we're looking at the chart, just look at this for a second. You will see some problems in, problem areas look like they're going to be Canada. Nothing really near Washington, D.C. Canada, the southwestern part of the United States around Arizona, up through Colorado and New Mexico, and up through Montana. And also, if we're looking at Mars lines are on the west coast around the west coast of Canada, but they're not interacting with anything in the Western Hemisphere. So Mars and Rahu are really close together in this particular line, so you may see some kind of earthquakes in the middle of the ocean, and maybe up near Alaska and northwestern Canada. The other thing is you have very concentrated sun-moon signs around New England, Puerto Rico again, unfortunately, and parts of Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, and a little bit of Argentina, the western part of Argentina. If you go over to Europe, you have Rahu lines over essentially Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis have been very strongly in the news lately because of Jeff Bezos. So there's going to be a scandal. That scandal will continue to unfold. Jeff Bezos' cell phone was apparently hijacked by, and you're also going to see lines through Norway, detrimental lines through Norway, Western France, Italy, Northern Europe, or Northern Africa, excuse me, and also out, but still in Australia and the Philippines. So those particular areas in February will be under attack, for lack of a better term. Also eastern Brazil. If we go to March 4th, just to try to encapsulate everything, March 4th is, let me just get this replaced, don't get the right time. My apologies for. But again, it's really important to analyze every part of the chart to make sure that it's lining up and you're not just looking at a similarity. And no offense to my astrological colleagues, but I'm only aware of a couple of astrologers who predicted 9/11. So essentially, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that some of these things can take anybody by surprise. The other part of the world I worry a little bit about is Turkey, because they have some fault lines, and they've been active volcanically in terms of earthquakes over the past few months, and they're going to be susceptible, especially around the end of February and March 4th. There is a fault line that runs all the way across northern Turkey, but I'm not expecting. So I'm expecting something to happen there, but I'm not expecting mass destruction or mass or any kind of a massive earthquake problem. But if I'm looking at this map, I'm seeing, so I'm not seeing any major lines except in far eastern Turkey. Moon, Rahu, Mercury lines in far eastern Turkey, so that looks like more where it's likely to hit. And this is around March 4th. And also, there are some Saturn lines over South America, so essentially eastern South America. So essentially, those parts of the world are going to be a little bit traumatically hit. Australia is still in trouble for the next few months. It looks like the fires aren't going to get out of there anytime really, really soon. Impeachment trial, it can go either way right now. They're talking about, on the day I'm talking to you, they're talking about witnesses. If that happens, it'll stretch until May. If it doesn't happen, it'll be over within, I think, before the end of February. The other thing I want to talk about was the signs. So for most signs, this month looks, for Aries, strong desires, strong ambitions coming in over the next year. That will continue from the last broadcast that I sent you, but also, especially in March, maybe some unrealistic aspirations. So there'll be some worry about falling back and losing position. It won't last very long, so don't be upset about that, especially around March 4th. For Taurus, this is for Eastern Taurus, which is May 15th to June 15th. Some concerns about money, financial growth, financial options, but also some good career status, but also problems with relationship life. For Gemini's had a challenging couple of years. It'll have a challenging year up until around September this year. So people who have Gemini rising in the Vedic tradition, or Sag rising for that matter, or Sagittarius sun or Gemini sun in Vedic astrology, which is June 15th to July 15th, they'll still continue to have some confusion over what they really want in life. They'll tend to have a bit of an obsessive nature, and like really wanting things to happen and really anxious for things to go their way. And they'll achieve it, but they'll still feel kind of unsatisfied about it. But for this chart, career success will actually improve, and also they'll start to see some greater luck in career around March. For Cancer, it has an interesting transit because Saturn's in the 7th house for Cancer, Sun or rising in Vedic. That's July to August 15th. And essentially, this does tend to mean if they get into a commitment, they'll lock into the commitment, they'll formalize it, but they may not be, it may feel like a bit of a compromise, or it may feel a little bit down, but they'll settle into something which is relatively secure and relatively stable, relationship-wise. Also, career-wise, and also they'll have some problems in terms of career growth because Saturn's aspecting in their 10th house. I'm sorry, Saturn's aspecting their ninth house, so they'll feel a little bit of like they have to work harder than most people do during these next couple of years. But it will give them increased status. Leo has Saturn in the 6th house, Sun and Mercury in the 7th house of the chart I'm looking at right now. This is for the latter part of February into March. And this sign will actually see a return of relationship partners. They'll actually see some new people coming into their lives, and also most of their focus will be on relationships. For Virgo Sun or Virgo rising, Saturn's in the 5th house, gives them good luck. It gives them some past life credit, but they're going to have to work like hell to make sure it works for them. Work very hard, and essentially there'll be increased fighting at home for this rising sign during those 2 months between roughly February and April. For Libra rising will have good status, good success, again, hard work, but a lot of drive, a lot of ambition, some minor health issues between February and March, but also just great relationship opportunities during that month. So they'll almost feel like all their relationship prayers are answered during that month. For Scorpio rising, Scorpio has its Lord in the 2nd house with Mars and K2, so they'll be a little bit more argumentative this month. Have to watch out for car accidents. That's one thing I should tell people when they're driving. Watch out for car accidents or injuries or on heavy machinery between February 23rd and March 4th, and a little bit beyond that. But Scorpios will be kind of aggressive. They'll be kind of quick with the tongue, a little bit unpleasant to be around, but they'll have a lot of drive, a lot of determination. They'll be focused very much on their homes and families and not so much on people around them, and their relationship partners will be a little bit unhappy. But again, not a bad year for them. They'll be very driven to succeed. Sagittarius, still some difficulties even with Jupiter in the 1st house for Sagittarius rising, so it'll be easier for them to get what they want. They'll have more money, they'll have more financial luck, children will prosper and do very well during this month. But I think the main thing they have to watch out for is overcommitting or trying to put on too much, and also being confused and being distracted. For Capricorn rising, actually a pretty good year, a pretty good few months, especially between now and March, and you'll start to see their financial life improving and growing. So essentially, for this chart, relationship life will also be good. For Aquarius, there'll be a lot of focus on Aquarians. This is essentially February 15th to March 15th. March 15th to February 15th, March 15th to April 15th of the Vedic chart. And essentially they'll have a lot of gracefulness, a lot of calm, a lot of smoothness in the sign, but they'll also have new friends and unusual friends popping into their lives, very creative people. But they will have a lot of expenses this year, to be honest. For Pisces, it looks like it's going to have a relatively good couple of months. Venus is in the 2nd house. Moon and Rahu are in the 4th house, so they'll feel anxious to move. They'll feel like they want to move, get away, but basically they'll be working hard. Everybody will be working hard because of that Saturn and Capricorn this year. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. So again, don't panic when you see prognostications especially about late February through mid-March. I don't think anything really catastrophic is going to happen. There are going to be the usual share of accidents because Mars and K2 were involved, and there are some dangers to the spots of the world that I identified earlier in the broadcast, but it will not be as catastrophic or as earth-changing or as scenario-changing as the September 11th, which it parallels only superficially. Okay? All right. Make your own reality. Don't worry about the stars. Charge ahead. You have work to do. and namaste.